Hi everyone, so today we're going to be taking a look at an interesting topic, and that is why I think that two candidates are big problems in the state of New Hampshire for Bernie Sanders, and one candidate is a big problem for Joe Biden in this state. So, those two candidates, I would say, uh, that uh, Tulsi Gabbard and Andrew Yang are big problems for Bernie Sanders, and Amy Klobuchar is a big problem for Joe Biden in the state of New Hampshire. Now, why are these minor candidates problems for these major candidates in New Hampshire and not Iowa? Well, Iowa is a caucus, and that means that if I know Gabbard and Yang are both doing much better in New Hampshire than they are in Iowa, but for example, Amy Klobuchar is doing quite well in Iowa for a minor candidate, but she's very unlikely to reach 15% in most precincts. So her voters can go to their second choice, which is probably Biden, maybe a bit going to Warren, maybe a bit going to Buttigieg, right? But in a primary election, there's no second choice. It's just like a normal election. You'll go in, you'll cast your vote among, pretty much all of these candidates except for Booker because now he's dropped out. And you'll go from there. And that is a problem for Bernie Sanders. Now, Andrew Yang and Tulsi Gabbard both have about 4.5% of the vote. Tulsi Gabbard has 4.6%. Andrew Yang has 4.4% in an average of polling in New Hampshire. If you go down to the latest poll here, they're both at 5%. The odd poll will have Yang at 6%. Some will have Gabbard at 4%. But overall, they're at about 5% on average in the state of New Hampshire. Now, here's the thing. In this state, you'll just go in like a normal election. So, if Gabbard supporters and Yang supporters, they're actually pretty likely to have Bernie as their second choice. For example, if New Hampshire was a caucus instead of a primary, then Tulsi Gabbard supporters, I would say probably 70% of them would go to Sanders, 70-80%. The rest would probably go to, either Biden or Warren. Yang supporters maybe a bit mostly from Sanders, but some would be from Joe Biden, some from Warren, some from Buttigieg. I wouldn't say very many from Buttigieg, who would be second choice as that person. Maybe some for Buttigieg because they're both, young people. But most of those supporters for both of those candidates would go to Bernie Sanders. So, and that's a problem for him. If Tulsi Gabbard and Andrew Yang will both bow out before New Hampshire, if they both drop out before New Hampshire, which is unlikely, then I think Sanders would have a much easier path. For example, if let's be generous to the other candidates. Let's say 60% of Gabbard supporters go to Sanders and 60% of Yang supporters go to Sanders. I would say it's more like 75 to 85%, but let's just say it's just 60%. That would mean that 3% of the vote from Gabbard would go over to Sanders. That brings him up to 32. 3% would come from Yang. That brings him up to 35. Now he's just increased his support by 6%. And now 35 compared to 14, 17, 13. That is a massive blowout lead for Sanders. Whereas right now, if it's still pretty strong, plus 12. That's a good lead. But then, when you factor in Amy Klobuchar supporters might go to Biden. There's a lot of calculations here going on. But as you can see, I've been trying to find polls that have, that will show Gabbard and Yang's second choices. But I would have a pretty good guess. You would have a pretty good go that they would be Sanders supporters mostly because they're both anti-establishment candidates. They're both, doing well in New Hampshire. Gabbard endorsed Sanders in 2016. Yang wasn't really on the political spectrum, but Yang has sort of, he's not for Medicare for all. exactly, it's not clear where he stands on that, but he has progressive policy positions. Gabbard, again, sort of Sanders light here. I'm not really sure about her policy positions, but Gabbard and Yang, I think, are problems for Bernie Sanders in New Hampshire. Now, another, I guess, element to this is Gabbard and Yang. They've both sort of been quite stagnant, or Yang not so much. If you go out to max, Gabbard at 0.5, Yang wasn't even registering then. Yang sort of started to have his sort of like surge. If you see the like green line here, Yang was at 1% in May 28, Gabbard at 0.5. They sort of slowly increased. Now they're back down to about 4.5%, 5%. So it's going to be interesting. But Andrew Yang, Tulsi Gabbard, problems for Bernie Sanders in New Hampshire, not problems in Iowa. If Gabbard and Yang had the same level of support in Iowa as they did in New Hampshire, that's not the case. They've been focusing, sort of going all in on New Hampshire, haven't really been paying much attention to Iowa. If you just take a look here, Tulsi Gabbard 1.7, Andrew Yang. Actually, Yang's doing okay, 3.7%. And you can really see Amy Klobuchar start to break away from the minor tier pack. But it's still quite a ways to go until she's going to catch up with the likes, with the likes of Buttigieg and Biden and others. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how all of this pans out. I can't wait to get the first caucus results. And just a quick note on Iowa. Look at this Buttigieg slide off here. Buttigieg was leading solidly, 24%. Now he's down to 16.3%. Right now, Biden's narrowly leading in Iowa. I mean, if Biden wins Iowa, I'm going to say it's absolutely done for the other candidates. He's going to definitely be the nominee here. But if Sanders wins Iowa and New Hampshire, I would say he has a same amount of percent of chance as Biden would to be the nominee. I don't know what I'm doing here. But anyway, if we go back to New Hampshire, because that's today's focus, Gabbard and Yang, problems for Bernie. Amy Klobuchar, problems for Biden and Warren. Amy Klobuchar is a problem for Biden and Warren. I mean, there is some flukes. I mean, Klobuchar here, 10%. I mean, if she gets 10% of the vote in New Hampshire, that would be very interesting. If she does better in New Hampshire than she does Iowa, that would get interesting. But sorry, I just had some water there. Amy Klobuchar, 5.8% in New Hampshire. If, let's say, Amy Klobuchar supporters, if I were to sort of percentage them out, we're just going to round it down to 5% that she has, just for the sake of it, because maybe, 0.8% are, die-hard Klobuchar fans, right? And if Klobuchar wasn't there, they wouldn't come out to primary vote, right? So 5%, I would probably say 0.5% goes to Sanders. I would say 2% goes to Biden. This would be 10% going to Sanders, 40% going to Biden, 40% going to Warren, and the rest going to Buttigieg. So 10% going to Buttigieg. So that means Sanders gets 10% of that vote. I mean, that's just 0.5. That would barely move his numbers up. Biden getting 2% of that vote. I mean, that would increase it by a bit. I think Amy Klobuchar is less of a problem for Biden than Gabbard and Yang, partly because there's both Gabbard and Yang, and also because I think their supporters would split more towards Bernie than Klobuchar supporters would towards Biden. It would be more of a split between Klobuchar supporters. But if I go into the Morning Consult, if I can find a Morning Consult National, they might have the second choices there. Let me just see if they do, because they might actually have that. No, they don't actually. But if we go, wow, they've really expanded it, haven't they? Among Liberal voters, look at this, Bernie Sanders leading 28-25. Among moderate voters, Joe Biden running away with that, and conservative voters, Biden also doing well. Voters of other races, Bernie Sanders, wow, look at that, 39% of the vote. That is very interesting to look at. Let's just move that over here. If we take a look here, Super Tuesday voters, wow, this is interesting, 27-25. That's surprising to me that it would go like that. That's very interesting. If we just go into the early primary voters, where's Klobuchar? Oh, wow, she's right down at the bottom. Anyway, I digress. But that is very interesting, because if we go back into New Hampshire, Amy Klobuchar is actually doing okay in New Hampshire, and I think that is quite the problem for Mr. Biden. So yeah, that's it for today's video, guys. Thank you for watching. Comment down your suggestions below, and I'll see you all in the next one.